It's August 5th, 1999, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Harrier, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
In the mid-1990s, Pepsi launched Drink Pepsi Get Stuff, a promotion where customers collected points to redeem prizes. And the TV ad's grand finale showed a Harrier jump jet landing outside a high school with the caption, "Harrier fighter, 7 million Pepsi points," which all must have seemed like tremendous fun to Pepsi at the time, but a bit of an error in hindsight today in history in 1999 when a court finally ruled against the guy who took Pepsi to court trying to claim the fighter jet he said they owed him.
Yeah, this was a legal case that was all about an advert featuring a young man collecting Pepsi points in an aspirational setting. It started with sunglasses, then a leather jacket. You know, these are the things you can get if you buy enough Pepsi and don't get diabetes. Then, at the end of the advert, to escalate, to make a humorous point, he gets a military-grade AV-8 Harrier 2 jump jet as the text on screen reads, "Ting! 7 million Pepsi points. Drink Pepsi, get stuff." Clearly a joke, you'd have thought.
Yeah, and Judge Kimba Wood, who after 3 years of this case was presumably highly over it, wrote in her judgment, "The callow youth featured in the commercial is a highly improbable pilot, one who could barely be trusted with the keys to his parents' car, much less the prize aircraft of the United States Marine Corps, and additionally, no school would provide landing space for a student's fighter jet or condone the disruption the jet's use would cause," which I think we can all say is, from a legal perspective, very watertight.
I think it's fair. Yeah. I mean, also, regardless of the fact that the judge felt that clearly the offer in the advert that you could claim a Harrier jump jet from Pepsi if only you bought enough Pepsi was ridiculous and therefore not binding, it's also really important that underneath all of that was the ruling that an advertisement is not a contract anyway. On top of it being absurd, even if there had been any sense that you could actually claim a Harrier jump jet from Pepsi by collecting enough tokens, it wouldn't matter because an advert isn't a contract. The way that the claimant, the college student John Leonard from Seattle, had formulated his claim was that it was a breach of contract on behalf of Pepsi. So in any case, wouldn't have won. But this story, it's like, it frustrates me because it's sort of, on the one hand, both exactly the kind of story that I created this show to cover. Like, it's fascinating, but also just so ridiculous and like a satire of America that A, people are being encouraged to drink so much Pepsi that they could feasibly cash in thousands of tokens in return for any kind of vehicle. B, that people are credulous of an obvious absurdity when it's advertised at them. And then C, that they would then follow through with this humorless legal process. You know, there's an argument of like, well, it started as a prank. He was just seeing whether he could push it. Maybe. But ultimately, it was because he felt there was a chance of some money at the end of it. This carried on, 4 years, wasting everybody's time.
Obviously, most viewers really did see this ad as a joke. Leonard, as you say, Ollie, took it as a legal binding contract offer. And he calculated that he'd have to drink roughly 16,000 cans a day for 100 years to accumulate 7 million points. But he realized that there was a loophole, which was that you could buy Pepsi points for 10 cents each, provided they, like a person who was submitting a claim, also submitted at least 15 points from actual cans. And so he realized that he didn't need to drink all that soda. He just needed $700,080.50. That was the amount that he put on the check that he sent into Pepsi saying, "One Harrier jump jet." That was what he scrawled at the bottom of the order form. And so within him, he was like, I actually have hacked the system. And I think you're right. At the beginning, he thought that he was doing a joke. But even he, like Leonard, later on, he has said, as a 21-year-old, he actually started to believe as the process progressed and got further into this legal quagmire that he might end up with an actual fighter jet at the end of this.
There's actually an AV Club article that points out that 2 years previously, The Simpsons had aired an episode, Bart Gets an Elephant, which basically had this exact premise. So perhaps, as a teenager in Seattle, he may have seen that episode and sort of embedded in his head that you could win these sort of ludicrous over-the-top prizes.
I mean, we all have like a little nugget of this in our brains, don't we, when we do an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? I mean, I've previously left the Weatherspoons with my takeaway cup of Lavazza and gone back 2 hours later and helped myself. We've all done that. But this is a Harrier jump jet that's worth $23 million. So that's clearly not going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're listening, you're probably thinking, where did a 21-year-old community college student get $700,000? And the answer was that he very luckily happened to know a multimillionaire, a guy called Todd Hoffman, a businessman that Leonard had befriended while he was working as a mountain guide in Alaska. He'd actually palled around with quite a lot of millionaires because obviously it's, quite a exclusive undertaking. Hoffman brought in 4 other investors to bankroll this scheme, which from their perspective you can see was risk-free, in that if Pepsi took their money, they would be getting a jet worth, more than $20 million. So from their perspective, it obviously seemed like a relatively, a low-risk investment. And so the cheque was duly sent off along with the 15 Pepsi Points coupons, because there had to be a Pepsi Points component as well. And at first, Pepsi seemed amused by Leonard's chutzpah. They returned the cheque with a letter clarifying that the ad was a joke and vouchers for 2 free packs of Pepsi, which I think 99 out of 100 people would have been perfectly happy with, but not.
Yeah, but I do think that was a mistake. I do think that was the moment where Pepsi could have had an opportunity to turn this into their advantage and instead came out looking corporate and legalistic, even though they didn't start the lawsuit. When their whole, we've talked about this before in episodes about the Cola Wars, haven't we? But their whole shtick in this period was the Pepsi generation spending loads of money on marketing, because this generation, what we now see as elderly millennials basically, were the people who represented their brand. And this kid, Leonard, was exactly who they wanted. Instead of offering him 2 free packs of Pepsi, they should have taken him on a promotional tour. I found an advertising executive, David Verklin, who said much the same to CBS in 1996. You have a guy here who's done something pretty clever. I'd give him a tour across the country in a Harrier jet. I'd turn it into a TV commercial. That's what they should have done. But instead, it's not their fault that the legal action came, but I think they could have combated it with some clever marketing.
I think that's so true. And if you want to identify someone who could be a representative of this very generation you're trying to create, someone who has the nerve to lead a lawsuit like this is the ideal candidate. And, you could mitigate the damage by doing something exactly like that. Here's our Pepsi generation representative, come to life and let's have fun with him.
And you're not necessarily opening the floodgates to other, because that's what they'd say, I guess, internally in Pepsi. They'd be like, but then there'll be loads of kids that want the Harrier jump jet. It's like,
yeah, he's not actually getting the jet.
Exactly. You're underlining the fact it's a joke, aren't you? By then making another jokey commercial with him.
But as it was, they chose to fight him in court with all their, top-notch lawyers. The case dragged on for several years before it did eventually land on the desk of Kimba Wood. And Judge Wood's summary judgment meant that there was no dramatic courtroom scene, no gasping gallery and no live jury reaction or anything. So at least that worked in Pepsi's favour. But, in handing down this written opinion, filled it as it was with those sort of humorous asides that you had quoted, Rebecca, I think there was this sense that we're drawing a line under this, but I don't think it worked in Pepsi's favour at all.
It also arguably didn't work in Leonard's favour at all. I mean, obviously not because he lost the lawsuit, but also because he had, in fact, along the way, and this is the really staggering thing about this story, I think, he had eventually been offered a settlement, which was rather more than 2 cases of Pepsi. He had turned down $750,000 from Pepsi before it went to court. I think that was an error on his part too, because it was never going to get any better than that.
But I think that maybe that enforces as well that his motives are difficult, because obviously when you read interviews with him in the years and decades now afterwards, he's looking back on it as something obviously that didn't succeed. So it's easy for him to say, the whole thing was just like a youthful lark. Once the case was rejected, he moved back up to Alaska. He returned to nature. He became a park ranger. Him and Todd Hoffman remained very close friends and climbing buddies. So it does seem like, it's not like he went on to become a sort of serial litigant. He really did seem to enjoy the publicity that this brought him. I think it was just a moment in the spotlight. Perhaps he thought that sharing a stage with these millionaires might have an advantage in his career in business, but it seems like he gave it all up, went back to the mountains. And if anyone benefited, I think it comes back to the whole all publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah.
Although PepsiCo didn't come off in the most fun light from this whole thing, they got a lot of free publicity, and publicity as well for this ad campaign. The whole thing about being able to buy Pepsi Points, obviously in the end, Leonard wasn't able to exploit that loophole. But the whole reason that loophole existed in the first place, presumably, was so that parents could top up their children's Pepsi Points if they were just a little bit short of at having enough for a baseball cap or a pair of sunglasses. And obviously, on that scale, 10 cents a point to buy something that's probably worth $1 to Pepsi is a good deal in Pepsi's favour. And they always knew that they were going to win this case. There was never a serious risk that they were going to lose it because adverts are not considered a contract in law, especially there's like a law that assets worth more than $500 have to be the subject of a written contract. And also, obviously, it would have had huge implications for advertising generally. You couldn't use hyperbole or humour or exaggeration in any adverts going forward if they had ruled against this.
But that is essentially what's happened. What has happened as a result of this is American advertising is now much worse than British advertising because they basically can't use humour or hyperbole without then having a disclaimer that lasts longer than the advert itself, saying every possible side effect of the promotion and treating the audience like complete idiots. That is what happened as a result of this.
Realising how close they'd come to this absolute public marketing disaster, Pepsi immediately updated their commercial. They dramatically increased the price of the jet from 7 million points to 700 million points. And they added an explicit legal disclaimer reading "just kidding" across the screen. The Pentagon also weighed in to put a kind of pretty definitive end to the madness. They officially clarified that Harrier jump jets were not for sale and couldn't be purchased by private citizens without being completely demilitarized and stripped of their tactical capabilities.
And of course, the advert still lives on YouTube because of this story. I guess the promotion isn't still running. So, you could still see them, couldn't you? I want that leather jacket. Where are my Pepsi points?
Right.
I can't get them.
There must be a warehouse full of them somewhere, don't you think?
The version I saw on YouTube did not say "just kidding" on the end, so I deserve that leather jacket.
Tomorrow.
The executioner, a guy called Edwin Davis, his official title was state electrician.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/retrospectors.